A person doesn't live in the past, yet they can never fully remove it from within. That moment has ended, but its echo still lingers. Those words were spoken, yet you can still hear them. That day has passed, but it still lives in your heart, because a person doesn't live with their past. They live with the meaning they give to it. And meaning doesn't change with time, it changes through dua. That's why some things don't need to be relived, but they do need to be prayed over again. Now ask yourself, which moment from your past, the one that never truly healed, still needs a dua? Write it down, because some wounds don't close when they're spoken of, only when they're prayed for. Ibn Arabi writes in Futuhat al-Makkiyah, "Time is an unbroken present. If you are still living a moment you believe is in the past, it hasn't ended yet. You thought you had forgotten that event until something similar happened, and the same place inside you began to ache. That means the wound never healed. It was only buried, and what is buried does not heal on its own." In psychology, this is called emotional freezing. When something happens and you can't feel what you need to feel, because survival demands silence. You say, "I stayed quiet," but your emotion froze right there. Years pass, but that frozen moment, that inner child, never leaves. You grow up, but that child stays in the same place, whispering the same question, "Why me?" Dua is the conversation with that frozen child. It doesn't reach back to the past. It reaches toward the one you were in the past. It whispers, "I have grown, but you are still there. I've come to take you home." In Sufism, time is not measured by calendars, but by states. If a day that has ended for the world is still open in your heart, then it is not past, it is present. And to pray for what is still open in the heart is not just to ask from Allah, it is to return it to Allah. You've been carrying that moment, hiding it, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with regret, sometimes with emptiness. But Allah does not want you to hold it. He wants you to release it. As Mevlana said, every memory becomes a state, and every state defines your closeness to Allah. If you still feel distant, it's because something inside you remains hidden, someone you haven't forgiven, something you haven't released, a day you couldn't let go. But Allah doesn't ask you to erase it. He asks you to surrender it. And surrender happens through dua. In psychology, this is called reframing. You cannot change what happened, but you can change what it means to you. You shift the question from, "Why did this happen to me?" to, "What did it teach me?" In Sufism, this transformation happens through dua. Because dua is not only about asking, it is about releasing a state. It's handing over your pain, your past, your shame, your tears, one by one, to Allah. And you say, "I give this to you because I can no longer carry it." According to Ibn Arabi, time has three faces: the outward time, what passes on the calendar; the inner time, what the heart still feels; and the divine time, the truth only Allah knows. You may have lived something 10 years ago, but if your heart still feels it as if it were yesterday, that event is alive in inner time. And what lives in inner time can be rewritten through dua. Because inner time doesn't follow the clock, it follows your turning. You may have said, "I've prayed so many times," but those prayers were always for the future, for something to happen, for something to end, for a door to open. But tell me, have you ever prayed for the past? For something that already happened, for that one moment that still quietly breaks you inside? Maybe it was a false accusation, maybe a humiliation you suffered as a child, maybe a loss you could never speak about, maybe the weight of a sin that was never yours, or maybe someone whose name you still cannot bear to hear. Dua is turning toward that weight and saying, "I am still hurt by you, but now I surrender you to Allah." When you do that, something changes. You don't cry, you don't scream, but inside, a voice finally grows silent. A voice that's been echoing for years suddenly finds its answer. That answer is called healing, and healing isn't hidden in time, it's hidden in dua. Junaid al-Baghdadi said, "The heart expands through dua, for dua is not the settling of the past within the heart, it is the settling of Allah Himself." Meaning, each time you pray, you are not calling your past, you are calling Allah into it. And that call doesn't take you out of time, it takes you out of the moment where you were broken. Now you realize, you've been carrying the past because the past never let go of you. But you also never invited Allah into your past. Yet Allah is not only the Lord of your future, He is the witness of every moment you have lived, and every witnessing is completed through surrender. So now it's time, return to that broken moment. Pray for the version of yourself that still lives there. You were not alone that day, and you will never be alone again. Sometimes, to protect itself, the heart freezes its emotions. A word wounded you, a departure shattered you, a dream collapsed. But you didn't cry, you didn't scream, you didn't even make a sound, because sometimes silence is the only way to survive. But that silence doesn't end the feeling, it buries it alive. It grows there, in the dark, until one day it begins to lead you. In psychology, this is called a frozen state, when unfelt, unspoken emotions leave traces in your body, in your mind, even in your personality. You may not remember the feeling, but it remembers you, and it shapes you. If you always fear being abandoned, you were once left behind. If you constantly try to please everyone, you once felt unseen. If you cannot take a step without approval, you once learned that love had conditions. These patterns are not built by reason. They are built by pain, and pain doesn't dissolve until it's prayed over. Ibn Arabi said the heart never forgets. The mind can silence it, the tongue can deny it, but the heart remembers what it has witnessed. The heart sees, the heart carries, the heart hides. And what it hides becomes the architecture of your life today. Why do we repeat the same wounds in every relationship? Why do the people who enter our lives hurt us in familiar ways? Why does the emptiness never fill when someone leaves? Because that emptiness isn't about that person. It didn't begin with them. That person didn't create the emptiness in you. They simply revealed the one that was already there. And that emptiness can only be healed when you turn back, not to relive the past, but to pray for it. Psychotherapy says, to recognize a feeling is to have the courage to feel it. But Sufism says, to bring that feeling to Allah is to return it to its true origin. Because every pain hides a secret, and every secret is opened through dua. Mevlana said, love your wounds, for they are the paths that lead you to Allah. But most people don't want to walk that path, because it's dark, it shakes you, it echoes with memories of the past. Yet, if you walk that path through dua, you won't walk it alone. Allah becomes your companion, and He brings you face to face with your former self, but this time with healing. So which version of you is still waiting for a dua? Perhaps the child who was belittled, perhaps the youth who was betrayed, perhaps the woman who couldn't speak, perhaps the man who stayed silent in despair. They all still live inside you, and all of them are still waiting for a dua. But you keep speaking from your present self, with today's words, today's language, yet that version of you spoke in silence. Now you must answer that silence with a dua. Ibn Arabi said, the heart is not shaped by the time of the past, but by the bond it holds with it, and that bond is direction, and direction is dua. The past doesn't live in your mind, it lives in the place your heart still faces. If you still feel anger, you are facing it. If you still resist, you are facing it. If you still cannot forgive, you are bound to it. So, dua means to turn that direction, to turn it back toward the Creator. This is where the mind's defenses appear. To protect you, the mind denies your pain. It minimizes it, mocks it, erases it. But the heart knows what is true. And if your heart still aches from the same place, then Allah's name has not yet been spoken there. That moment has not yet been prayed over. It has not yet been surrendered, because some pains cannot be lightened by reason, only by Allah. Junaid al-Baghdadi said, "A heart that does not surrender remains a prisoner of the past." Surrendering doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean weakness or indifference. It means leaving what has happened to Allah and deciding not to carry it anymore. That decision itself is dua. Now close your eyes. Write a letter or a prayer to your past self, but not with today's words. Think of that version of you. What did they need most? Love? Protection? Simply to be heard? Offer that need to Allah today, because what you couldn't receive then, Allah can give you now. Psychology tries to analyze the past. Sufism teaches us to surrender it. And when the two meet, healing becomes visible. You are no longer fighting your past, you are finally making peace with it. When you pray for your past, you're not trying to fix it, you're giving it back to Allah. And that surrender doesn't just empty your heart, it rebuilds it. You misunderstood time. You thought it was only made of hours and clocks. But time isn't something you pass through, it's something that passes through you. It's a mirror. And if that mirror still holds the traces of your past, you can't truly see the present. You may live today, but your soul remains trapped yesterday. Because you don't live in what you experience, you live in what you mean by it. According to Ibn Arabi, time isn't a flowing river, it's a center. And every heart that turns toward that center transforms not only meaning, but the past itself. In Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he writes, "Time appears to flow, but in truth, it draws you in." You look at time, but time looks back at you. In other words, whatever you lived, time didn't just record it. It also watched what you learned from it. To pray is not just to turn toward Allah, it is to look time in the eye and say, "I have changed. I am no longer that version of myself. I entrust who I was to you, because time isn't something you live through, it's something you witness. And every witness requires surrender. Yes, you were abandoned. You were betrayed. You were unseen, unloved, misunderstood. But realize this, even if those events never happen again, you're still carrying them. And that burden prevents time from transforming you, because time is not just what passes, it is what renews. In Sufism, this is called Hali Sabit, a fixed state, a soul that appears to move forward, but in truth remains in the same place. If years later you still approach people with the same fears, the same patterns, then you haven't truly progressed. Time may have passed, but Zaman has not worked within you. You are still resisting the past, and that resistance wounds only you. Why is the past so powerful? Because when those moments happened, you weren't just experiencing events. You were building an identity. When you were abandoned, loneliness became more than a feeling. It became a definition. You wrote inside yourself, "I am someone who is left behind." And years later, if you still fear being abandoned, it's not the past itself that binds you. It's the identity you built from it. And identity cannot be undone until it is prayed over. In psychology, this is called a core belief, the unconscious sentences you build about yourself. I am unlovable. I am unseen. I always lose. I will always be kept waiting. When you recognize these words, you stand at a crossroad. Either keep living stories that confirm those sentences, or surrender them to Allah and begin to write a new truth. That act of rewriting, that is dua. A truth not written by you, but written through you. Because dua is not only what comes from your lips, it's realizing who is speaking through you. Every dua you make today is the voice of a child who once had to stay silent. A youth's silent cry, a mother's tear, a father's deep sigh, or perhaps the version of you who never spoke. That, too, is a prayer rising to Allah for the very first time. Mevlana said, "You think the heart is silent and only the tongue prays, but the true dua is the voice of the heart itself. To pray for the past is the heart's way of speaking again, not through words, but through meaning. And meaning is everything, because you cannot change what happened, but you can change what it means to you. And when meaning changes, the past may remain the same, but you are transformed. Ibn Arabi said that time has sons, moments born from inner states. When you once lived through deep pain, a kind of birth occurred within time. But that birth was incomplete, broken, unfinished. Now you return not with a time machine, but with dua, to bring light into that fractured hour. Perhaps long ago you said, because the map of attachment drawn in childhood shapes not only our human connections, but also our connection with the divine. Ibn Arabi said in the Futuhat, each person imagines their Lord in accordance with their own nature. So if someone once left you, you may start imagining Allah as one who might also leave. But that is illusion, and illusion speaks not with truth, but with pain. Thus, to pray for the past is not merely to accept what happened. It is to correct the way you once imagined Allah. Because some wounds cannot heal through time, or through therapy alone, only through dua. And dua must face backward before it can move you forward. If no one came when you cried as a child, you may grow up avoiding the word help, because your mind remembers that your plea once vanished into silence. Yet the first word of dua is help, a word that itself can feel like pain. That's why some people can't pray, because asking for help takes them back to that dark, unanswered night. Their subconscious whispers, if you ask again, you'll be alone again. If you hope again, you'll be hurt again. Praying for the past means breaking that inner spell, because you are no longer that child. But Allah is still the same Rahman. Mevlana tells of a man who, as a boy, stole something and spent years crushed by guilt, so ashamed that he stopped praying. One night, in tears, he said, Allah, even as a child, I ran from you. How can I come to you now? And Allah replied, even before you knocked, I was there. But I waited, not for your prayer, but for your forgiveness of yourself. That is why praying for the past is not only surrendering what happened, it is surrendering who you were to the mercy of Allah, because the child who lived through that pain is still there, still crying, and until you soothe that child through prayer, you cannot enter a new life. Carl Jung said, what is repressed does not disappear, it only changes form. The wound you never prayed for becomes the silence you live with now. And unless that silence is opened in dua, the veil between you and Allah remains. Ibn Arabi taught that dua is not only asking, it is recognizing. When you carry a past pain into dua, you begin to see the divine wisdom hidden within it. For every event longs to reveal the face of the truth. But unless you pray for it, you will never see that sacred secret. Some people seek healing by forgetting. But healing without remembrance is peace without roots. You can forget those who hurt you, but you cannot forget the states in which you were hurt. They return again and again, through new faces, new cities, same pain. That is why dua for the past is never for a person. It is for a state, so that it will not repeat, because Allah breaks the cycles the moment you finally ask, why does this always happen to me?